a grin in the Kremlin and a chill in Brussels. President Donald Trump's new national security plan has sent NATO scrambling. As America steps back from NATO, Europe is fearing Vladimir Putin is ready to step in. Our next story takes a close look at why there are fears of American withdrawal and questions on NATO and European Union's future.
A storm of geopolitics knocks at the gates of Europe. On the chessboard of superpowers, new lines are being drawn. And somewhere, Vladimir Putin is smiling as Donald Trump rewrites the rules. President Trump's America First doctrine has culminated in a national security strategy that seemingly targets Europe, throwing the 70-year transatlantic partnership into chaos. The new US doctrine takes aim at Europe, calling it over-regulated, lacking in self-confidence, and facing civilizational erasure due to immigration. The reaction from Europe has been furious.
What we cannot accept is this threat of interference in European politics. The United States cannot replace European citizens in choosing which parties are good and which are bad.
The Federal Republic of Germany has so far been able to discuss all of these issues internally in a satisfactory manner, and we also see ourselves in the future capable of addressing and discussing this entirely on our own, and we do not need any outside advice on this.
The strategy clearly states that the US will adopt a more limited and conditional role in European defense, shifting the burden onto allies who must now frantically find billions of US dollars to cover the sudden security vacuum. The Pentagon has already begun drawing down troop numbers on NATO's eastern flank, a clear physical manifestation of the new disengagement. While Brussels is fretting, the Kremlin is smiling. It has fulsomely praised the US national security strategy, saying it corresponds to their vision. The new doctrine also asserts that the US should stop calling Russia a direct threat. European capitals erupt in alarm. For decades, NATO served as the linchpin of defense and deterrence. Now, with Washington's support receding, NATO members face a moment of reckoning. A weakened US presence could leave Europe exposed. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And joining us live from Berlin, Germany, is Mr. Ben Aris. He's the founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews and also former Moscow bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph. Mr. Aris, thank you very much for your time. I just want to know, if America does decide to withdraw, what happens to NATO and what could be the repercussions after that?
It's a little bit more nuanced than that. America's not withdrawing from NATO, but it's definitely a big shift in emphasis. I mean, since the end of the Second World War, that NATO, that Europe in particular, has sort of cozied under the US security umbrella. What that meant in practice was that America has invested very heavily into its military, multiple size of anything that Europe has, and it's provided a security guarantee for Europe in the form of nuclear deterrent. I mean, the US has easily 10 times as many nuclear weapons as Europe does combined, and in massive stocks of conventional forces. And the idea being that if then the Soviet Union in the Cold War and now Russia were to invade into Europe, that America would come to its rescue with overwhelming forces. And that's now come off the table. And what the new strategy is saying is that Europe has to take responsibility for its own defenses, but it's all framed in the idea of load sharing, and that The Europeans, although they're going to be responsible for running their defenses, particularly conventional, America's still going to backstop them, is still going to sell them arms, could come to their military aid if needs be, but it's no longer going to be the primary source of security. That aid is no longer going to be automatic. And he's extended this idea of military support around the world, where everyone is being called on to find partners in order to share the load, in order to provide sort of collective security. And America is not going to be, the global policeman anymore. It's not going to be the #1 force. Because here in Europe, with spending, America's been spending whatever it is, 2, 3, 4% of GDP on defense, which is an enormous amount. People here in Europe were supposed to spend 2% of GDP on their defense under the old mandate, and they just simply weren't doing it. They were spending like less than 1% and saving themselves money, confident that America would come to their rescue. And that is what Trump has attacked. He said, you can no longer be confident we'll come to your rescue. You've got to spend the money. And at the NATO summit earlier this year, he insisted people didn't spend the 2% that they promised, but actually 5% of GDP by 2032. And so there's a huge rearmament program going on now. And people in Europe already, 2/3 of people are up to the 2%, but they're going to spend billions more, presumably on American arms, in order to take responsibility of their own security. So that's what's changed.
Talking about responsibility, Mr. Aris, from someone who's looking outside, or from critics who are looking outside, they say that the European Union is getting weaker by the day, or the bloc is getting weaker by the day. What can the bloc do to recalibrate itself? Very quickly.
Spend money. Militarily it's got stronger because, as I said, the spend's gone up to something like 150 billion a year. But without America's support, it's significantly weaker. And even von der Leyen said earlier this year, when she was talking about modernization of the army, that Russia is already outproducing the entire European NATO bloc plus Ukraine in terms of arms production. And that imbalance, that's something that NATO in Europe needs to address, needs to catch up, needs to spend the money. But as you know, the whole of Europe is in recession. Sanctions have bounced back and hurt it. Everyone's short of money. Budget deficits are running very high, debt even higher. And so they've got this huge problem, this financial problem of how they're going to raise the money to pay for all of that, and at the same time take complete responsibility for Ukraine, funding Ukraine, because the Americans have totally dropped out of that, and that runs at 100 billion a year. So Europe is in deep trouble. They've got to make some big changes. They've got to spend a lot of money. They've got to find that money somehow, which is not clear, and they've got to do it quickly because Russia's coming. The war's coming to an end, and then Russia's going to be armed to the teeth in full military production, and Europe is simply not ready to meet that challenge.
All right, Mr. Ben Aris, it's good to see you. Thank you very much for your insights today and for talking to us.
Pleasure.